The Tudor History and Travel Show is a podcast that brings Tudor history to life by exploring Tudor places and artefacts in the flesh. You will be travelling through time with Sarah Morris, the Tudor travel guide, uncovering the stories behind some of the most amazing Tudor locations and objects in the UK. Because when you visit a Tudor building, it is only time and not space which separates you from the past. And now over to your host, Sarah Morris.
Hello my time-travelling friends and welcome to today's episode of the Tudor History and Travel Show. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you are well and looking forward to our time-travelling adventures today. Now the first thing I wanted to say is that January is the anniversary for the show, so we are 3 years old today. Yay! Happy birthday to us. And of course, I wanted to thank you wholeheartedly for coming along and joining in these adventures. Really, without you, this show would be nothing. So I love bringing you the stories of Tudor places and Tudor history. And I just thank you so much for being along with me on that. And of course, a massive thank you to all the current patrons of the show who support my work month in, month out. I am so deeply grateful. Thank you so much. Okay, thank yous over. I just wanted to say that maybe some of the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed a slight change in the name of the show. So far, of course, we have been the Tudor Travel Show. But I felt that we were busy weaving the stories of history and characters with places. And so it was more befitting, perhaps, that we might call ourselves the Tudor History and Travel Show, which will be the show name henceforth. Now, the other thing, of course, being the Tudor travel guide, is I do get people emailing me about their travel plans and asking me where they should go, where they should stay, what my top tips and recommendations for, etc, etc, etc. And so it felt really appropriate, and something that I very much wanted to do is to put together a travel essentials show specifically for those of you who are planning your first trip or maybe planning return trips here to the UK to come and see your favourite Tudor places. And so going forward, I'm going to be increasing the amount of content that's going to be available to you guys. There will be the usual show at the beginning of every month where, COVID allowing, I go on location and we explore some of your favourite Tudor places and artefacts. Then in the middle of the month, so that's the second show of the month, I'm going to be bringing to you an abbreviated 15 to 20 minute show called the Tudor History and Travel Show Travel Essentials. And I'll be interviewing my favourite time travelling partner in crime, Philippa Bruhl from British History Tours. And Philippa and I are going to be chatting about a hot travel topic and answering some of your most commonly asked travel questions. How do I get around? How do you use the train? Should I have a car? What's closer to this? What's closer to that? You know, what should I be wearing if I come in June? What's the weather like in August? All of that kind of thing. We're going to try and address some of those questions as we go through the year. And I'm also going to be doing a little bit of digging on your behalf and bringing you some top recommendations for places to stay, alongside letting you know about Tudor events that are coming up in the calendar. So if you are planning a trip, you hopefully will be able to factor in some of those Tudor events, exhibitions, etc, that are going on around the country that can just add that little bit of extra sugar and spice to a trip. So that's all in the pipeline, and the first Travel Essentials show will be coming your way later this month. So I look forward to bringing you that, and I look forward to your feedback. And of course, if you have any questions, travel questions that you want answered, make sure you drop me a line at sarah@thetudortravelguide.com, and I and Philippa from British History Tours will do our best to bring you the answers. Okay, I think that's it. We're ready to get on with today's show. Now, some of you may know that I'm a Yorkshire lass, which means I come from the north of England, North Yorkshire in particular. And so I was thrilled to be able to head back to my home county for the recording of today's show. In fact, we are going to be looking at one of the most tumultuous episodes in the early 16th century, and that of course was the dissolution of the monasteries. And today's location was, like many religious houses, hit hard by Henry VIII's reforms. And so, back on a glorious autumnal day in 2020, I travelled up from my home in Oxfordshire, heading northwards to North Yorkshire, to Rievaulx Abbey, which is one of the great Cistercian abbeys that were ruined and dismantled as part of the dissolution of the monasteries. Now, today, those monasteries are beautifully cared for by English Heritage, and I was delighted to be able to meet up with its senior properties historian, Michael Carter, who has a particular interest in monasticism and the Cistercians. No better person, therefore, to talk to us about Rievaulx Abbey, the great abbeys of Yorkshire, the dissolution of the monasteries, and the enormous religious and social impact it had on England at the time. So welcome to this month's episode of the Tudor Travel Show, and I am here in the glorious countryside of North Yorkshire, which is actually the county of my younger days, so it's so good to be home. And we're in the most incredible, peaceful valley, and in front of me are some stunning ruins of Rievaulx Abbey. But more importantly, I'm here with our guide for today. So welcome Michael Carter from English Heritage.
It's a real pleasure to be here in one of my favourite places on earth.
Wonderful. So you are the senior properties historian?
I'm a senior properties historian, one of a team, and my specialism is monasteries, which is wonderful. I get to spend all my time reading and writing about monasteries, which have been a passion of mine since childhood.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And a special interest of mine are the Cistercians, and that's the order of monks to whom Rievaulx Abbey belonged. And they arrive here in 1132, these austere, back to basics monks wearing white habits to symbolise their poverty and their austerity, and distinguishing them from the Benedictines, the dominant form of monastic life in Europe. And they think the Benedictines have gone a little bit lax, and the Cistercians are trying to get back to what they see as being the purest interpretation of the rule of St Benedict. And they arrive here in northern England. Rievaulx Abbey is founded in 1132 with the backing of various local bigwigs and with the interest of the greatest Cistercian saint of all, St Bernard of Clairvaux. And it's the monks who arrive here in 1132 are led by a native Yorkshireman called William, and they send shockwaves around the monasteries of northern England and set off a chain of events that leads to the foundation of Fountains Abbey. They really
so this predates Fountains, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, is that right?
Well, it turns out to be that, and it isn't always the way, and they're great, you know, I wouldn't say rivals, but they're two equally important monasteries. There's a little bit of a difference in status by the period we'll be talking about. But yeah, and then the Cistercians spread explosively across England and northern England. This is the first abbey founded in northern England. It's here to spearhead Cistercian settlement of northern England and Scotland, and as they arrive here in 1132, and the abbey rapidly prospers. Now, in a description of the site of Rievaulx Abbey, made in the 12th century, is still recognisable to this day, and I can't think of many places in Britain where that is true. And it says, high hills enclose the valley,
and so it does,
encircling it like a crown. These are clothed in trees of various sorts, preserving in pleasant wooded retreats the privacy of the vale, and creating for the monks a second kind of paradise of wooded delight. And the first paradise are those magnificent ruins you can see there. And Rievaulx Abbey is, I'm going to make a very bold statement here.
Go for it.
Rievaulx Abbey is architecturally and spiritually the most important Cistercian monastery in England.
Well, that's fabulous, and that description is absolutely true. You are surrounded by a crown of hills that are wooded, and we've got swallows swooping and diving above our heads here. They're obviously nesting in these magnificent ruins, and just for those of you who are listening, no doubt there will be a blog to accompany this, and I'll be able to put some pictures of Rievaulx Abbey in, so you'll be able to refer to that blog as Michael and I are talking. Now, our mission today, Michael, is to actually talk about the dissolution of the monasteries, but also to weave that story very much into the fabric of this building. And I know you've got some very special kind of plans for us as we go around, so where we can bring the different elements of the dissolution to life within the fabric of Rievaulx today. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll be visiting some key buildings within the monastery, all of which have a story to tell about what happened to this monastery in the 1530s, in the run-up to the dissolution, during the dissolution, and the immediate aftermath.
Perfect. So why don't we get going, and you take me to the first place where we can start off with what was going on at the turn of the 16th century, as you say, just on the eve of the dissolution.
Yeah, okay. Right, I'm trying to think of the easiest way in. It's a complicated site, as you can see. I think we go this way. There might be some low walls.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So, Michael, you've brought me into what feels like the heart. Feels like we're in a cloister here, are we? Or are we?
We are in a cloister, but we're not in the main cloister. This gives you an idea of just how enormous Rievaulx is, that we're actually in the Infirmary Cloister. And it's a complex of buildings that dates to the 12th century, and it's built by the most famous and important man to be associated with Rievaulx, and that's Abbot Aelred, who is venerated here as a saint after his death in 1167. And just to the north of us, you can see a little sign that says Longhouse.
Yes, I can. So there's some steps, isn't there? The remains of little steps
leading up. And that was where Aelred lived his final years in excruciating pain and agony, and a description of his life written just after his death just paints this picture of this remarkably kind, compassionate man who founds a vision of monasticism based upon love and inclusion. And then there's a magnificent church as well. But the building I want to talk about is, because I'm going to set the scene here about Rievaulx Abbey in around about 1500.
Okay.
Now you'll have, I'm sure so many of your listeners will have heard the story of evil monasteries or decadent, decaying monasteries around 1500. And we've got in front of us the infirmary complex at Rievaulx. But if you look very, very closely, you can see early 16th century window heads. These sort of Gothic-y window heads. And you're perfectly forgiven if you can't work this out. But can you see what's above the doorway?
Well, there is certainly a tablet of stone which has carvings on it. They are a bit worn. I think I can make out is that an angel?
It is an angel,
on the left.
You're doing very well, yeah.
And then there looks to be a figure of somebody else on the right. So they're obviously in some kind of, I don't know, communion with each other.
Now, can you see what's in the middle?
No, it looks like a pot.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always worth stating the obvious.
Yeah, with a Christmas tree going out.
Well, you're not that far off, and then there's something on the right as well. And then can you see something right above in the scene?
Yeah, it's like a hand.
It is exactly a hand.
Okay,
now, it is very, very eroded, but what we have there is a scene of the Annunciation to the Virgin, when the Archangel Gabriel comes and tells the Virgin she's going to conceive. Okay. And what we're looking at is the entrance of the late medieval abbot's house here at Rievaulx.
It's a very fancy door, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's giving you an idea of the status of the Abbot of Rievaulx, and also that Rievaulx is a living monastery, and the 12th century monastery has gone through a hell of a lot of changes by the time we get to 1500, and the abbot has taken over the infirmary and turned it into a palatial lodging. It's done by Abbot John Burton, who's abbot here in around about 1500, and he's a very, very important man locally. Now, the community here at Rievaulx, at its height, included as many as 640 men.
Right.
By the late Middle Ages, the community is much reduced. We're talking about 30 monks in around about 1500. That might sound like a low number, but it's actually a perfectly respectable number for a mid-ranking monastery, which is what Rievaulx becomes by around that time. And it's what the monastery can afford to maintain. It's got nothing to do with lack of monastic vocations. It's because the monastic economy for Rievaulx can only support about that many number monks. And it's a typical picture around the country. Even Westminster Abbey, enormously rich Westminster, has about 50 monks. 50 to 80 monks. It's so it's not a particularly low figure.
So why, can I just ask you, why in the early medieval period could the same building with the same land around it support so many more people?
The economies change, and the Cistercian economy is, as we could see in the field over there, the farm of I like to think the sheep. They're massive sheep farmers. In actual fact, they have fingers in every pie. Monasteries, especially the Cistercians, it's not just sheep; it's all kinds of agriculture, even industry. But there's a terrible epidemic of sheep scab. It sounds as horrible as it sounds. Sorry, it is as horrible as it sounds at the end of the 13th century. Devastates their flocks. Then there is terrible warfare at the turn of the 14th century, which affects monasteries very badly here in northern England. In fact, Rievaulx Abbey on the 14th of October 1322 is sacked by the Scots, and Edward II is at the abbey just before the sacking happens, and he runs away, leaving his treasure behind, and the Scots despoil the monastery of its books, chalices and sacred things.
Well, it makes a change from the English going up.
Well, actually, the Scots actually behave a lot better than the English did as well. When the English sacked Melrose Abbey, they killed a lot of the monks, whereas they might rough up the community a little bit, to get the things, but they don't kill any. They're better behaved. So and then there's a whole changes of the Cistercians are directly farmed their own estates using a class of monks called the lay brothers. And now they're not Latin literate, so they can't sing the 8 services that punctuate the monastic day, but they serve God with their labour. And the lay brotherhood, for various economic and religious reasons, stops being important. So they start to tenant their farms.
I see.
So their income goes down dramatically.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, so as you were saying, here it's all about status now.
Yeah,
we've got a complete change of...
Well, we've got status, definitely. The abbot has always been a very important person. Aelred went on diplomatic missions to Rome. His name was familiar at the royal courts of England, France and Scotland, and also at the papal court in Rome. So the abbot of Rievaulx has always been an important person. He's regularly called to Parliament into the 14th century. The successor of Abbot Burton, who builds this, Abbot Helmsley, is called a very important man in the county of York. It gives you an idea of the status. It's a very, very important place, both religiously and economically and also politically. But it's changing, and just over here we can see the ruins of the south transept of the church, and you can see various cut lines into the south transept wall, and that's where the dormitory was. And the enormous dormitory here at Rievaulx, which at one time accommodated as many as 140 monks, by the late Middle Ages it's been divided up. Stops being a communal space and becomes nice cells for the monks. They're living a much more private life, and that's in keeping with general improvement in living standards of monks in the late Middle Ages. So we're seeing changes in monasticism, and Rievaulx can be used as a case study for it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's declining. By 16th century standards, Rievaulx is actually a thriving monastery, and if anything, religious observance at Rievaulx at the turn of the 16th century is probably better than it has been for 100, 150 years. So it's a very, very locally important monastery. It's got an incredible reputation for holiness. It's deeply embedded in the local economy. It's deeply embedded in local society. So I think that gives you an idea of just how important it is.
So I can make your paper on the Dissolution and the Monasteries available. I'll put a link in the description to this podcast for those people who wish to read more. But when I was reading it, I was certainly, yes, you were making the point that so many people have fallen, in fact, for the Tudor propaganda, that these monasteries needed reforming and they were, as you said before, lax in their morals. But actually what you're doing is you're painting a picture of the fact that really that wasn't the case, and in fact they were all still thriving.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Okay. Monasteries always needed reforming. It's one of the things about monastic life. Imagine, I mean, if anyone tries reading the Rule of St Benedict or the Rule of St Augustine, you realise just how hard life within a monastery could be. And you need to have periodic, what are called visitations. Another abbot or bishop comes in to see how you're meeting standards. And they are always going to find fault. And they're a major source for studying the monasteries. And it gives one picture of the monasteries, which is often a very, very negative picture. And the criticisms that you find of monasteries in the 16th century are no different really to what you're finding in the perceived golden age of the 12th century. So you need to be cautious how you're using these sources. And there are some, pretty racist story about monks and nuns, which, not all of which are made up, I have to say. There were legitimate criticisms. And abbots of places like Rievaulx and nearby fountains are doing their best to make sure that monks are living the kind of life they should be living. And by and large, successfully, not always, and some monasteries just aren't viable by the early 16th century. There's one called Binham Abbey in Norfolk. No, it's not called Binham Abbey. There's one called Creek Abbey in Norfolk, and it just simply dies out. The community dies out. And then in 1525, Cardinal Wolsey, who's a man of impeccable Catholic credentials, dissolves 25 smaller monasteries to fund some educational establishments at Oxford and Ipswich, which he's founded. So, there's a sort of sense that, well, monasteries, although they're established as permanent corporations, can be closed down if they're not thought to be viable. And
what you've just referred to there, the closure of these monasteries under Wolsey, again, I think perhaps quite a lot of people are not aware that the main dissolution actually had this forerunner.
Actually, monasteries have been dissolved as well since the 13th century.
Oh,
so you have what are called the dependent monasteries. These are the monasteries which are small offshoots of French monasteries, and we're always biffing the French, having scraps with the French, and then between the 13th and 15th century, English kings get very, very cross about this idea of English monasteries sending money and own some sort of loyalty to French monasteries, and so some of these so-called alien priories become dissolved, or they're forced to sever their ties with France. So there have been dissolutions before the main dissolution.
Yes, and maybe this is a time to touch on this. I know we're kind of jumping backwards and forwards in the story slightly, and I'm sure we'll come back to this. But there was a certain character involved in those dissolutions who came to play a major role. What can you tell us about him?
Absolutely. Well, the man who plays a key role, who's Thomas Wolsey's key agent in this, is Thomas Cromwell, and he makes a web of connections and learns some good legal skills that he puts in 1525, dissolving these smaller monasteries, in the 1520s rather, dissolving these smaller monasteries, that proves invaluable a few years later.
Yeah, so he's just kind of cutting his teeth, shall we say.
He's a very, very talented lawyer, and he's a very, very complicated person as well, and he has a complex relationship with the monasteries. It isn't entirely hostile. He has some very, very good friends who are heads of monasteries, who he corresponds with in very favourable terms, but he's also meddling in the monasteries as well.
So let's move forward in our timeline. I think to what, the 1530s
We'll
now?
go to the 1530s, yeah, and we're going to go into the Abbey's chapter house, which is an extraordinary building, even though it's been reduced to its more or less foundation levels. If we look on our left, you can see, well, I'll let you read what it says there.
Yeah, so there's a plaque on the wall. So we've got sort of two columns, and we've got, what would you call this sort of above it
Slab,
here? Just a slab of, and then a kind of a space where something clearly sat. And it says on the plaque, the Shrine of Abbot William, 1131 to 45.
Yeah, well, Abbot William, the founding abbot, is venerated here at Rievaulx as a saint. And this building, it dates to Aelred's abbacy, is built to emphasise his sanctity. It's based on early Christian churches in Rome. William's venerated here as a saint. Aelred is buried here in the chapter house when he dies in 1167. It's a place of sanctity, and then his remains are moved to the church, which we'll talk about presently. But this is a very, very important building in the administration of the abbey.
So it's a horseshoe shape, isn't it? We're standing in front of sort of a horseshoe shape, and there are some tombs, clearly tombs, embedded in the ground.
Yeah, and this is where the abbots of Rievaulx were buried until the 14th century, when they start thereafter to be buried in the church. And it's here where the monks gather every morning to listen to a reading of the chapter of the Rule of St Benedict, giving the monastery its name. But it's also where they transact very important business, and that includes as well the election of abbots. And in 1533, there's a very, very disputed abbatial election here at Rievaulx. In 1533, the office of abbot here at Rievaulx becomes very disputed indeed. Now, the abbot is a man called Edward Kirby, and he's an Oxford scholar, and he's eminently qualified for the role. Although when he was at Oxford, there's a suggestion he was a bit of a jacked-up lad. He behaved as I think many a student does today. But the patron of the monastery, that's the descendant of the founder, Thomas Manners. He says that he accuses him of maladministration of the house, and a commission of inquiry is convened about it, and that involves other local Cistercian abbots, the abbots of Byland, the abbot of Fountains as well, Abbot Thirsk. And Abbot Thirsk, they're trying to depose Kirby, and
they've got an agenda.
And absolutely, and Kirby, how guilty Kirby is of these offences is open to question. And indeed, Abbot Thirsk of Fountains says, well, actually, I'm not satisfied that these proceedings are legal. And he excuses himself and will have nothing more to do it. And anyway, with the meddling of Thomas Cromwell, Kirby resigns. He's given quite a nice pension, £44 a year, which is a lot of money at that time. And a man is imposed on the abbey. He's the Abbot of Rufford down in Nottinghamshire, which is what's called a daughter house of Rievaulx. It had been founded back in the 12th century by monks of Rievaulx. A man called Roland Blyton becomes Abbot of Rievaulx in his stead. But the community is bitterly, bitterly divided. Only 8 members of the community consent to Blyton's election as being legal. The other ones aren't happy at all. Now, monks can often be fractious bunches. Imagine living in close proximity with each other. The angelic life which they're supposed to live. Well, it doesn't always happen. And actually, monastic history, as far back as you want to go, is littered with disputed elections about who's going to be the head of the house. So there's nothing necessarily new there, but it's the involvement of Cromwell, and it's also happening 1533 and the King's Great Matter.
Of course, everything has come to a head at this point.
Indeed, and what we're finding is that if there are faults with monasteries, it's now taking place in a background where we've got Henry, who's looking to find a way out of his marriage with Catherine, and also the evangelicals, which has now become the preferred nerdy term for early Protestants, are gaining more and more influence at court. And they're getting Henry's ear, and it's like, well, these monasteries are dens of papistry. the Cistercians, they owe their loyalty to the Cistercian order in France, and they're always firing off letters to Citeaux, the chief house of the Cistercian order, or to the papacy in Rome. And can we trust them? And really, prayers for the dead, which is what these monasteries exist for. Well, have you read what these new theologians in Germany and Switzerland are saying? It's a waste of time. You don't need these good works to secure the salvation of your soul. It's secured only by faith in Christ alone. These are superfluous. Now, Henry's doesn't really have much time for a lot of the Luther's writings. He writes a defence of the seven sacraments, for which he's rewarded by the Pope with the title of Defender of the Church. But it gives you an idea of it's becoming a much richer mix where criticism of the church and criticism of the monasteries might lead to something else.
Yes, it's becoming more trendy. And I think one of the things that struck me in your paper was you were saying, most of the country was absolutely still devoutly Catholic, but I think you're making the point that there were a few really key influences around the king. Very much in the minority, but you have the Anne Boleyns, you have the Thomas Cromwells, etc., who have a lot of influence. And also,
quite where their religious beliefs are going to go is still at this time a little bit open to question. Cromwell, I think, is a convinced evangelical from the 1520s, and the brilliant biography of Dermot McCulloch, I think, makes that quite clear. But, Anne Boleyn still has a very Catholic prayer book, a Catholic Book of Hours, which she uses, and, there are other people who, both in the continent and here, that they like some aspects of the piety being promoted by reformers. Even people within the circle of Thomas More, who becomes a Catholic martyr, and these people become huge adherents of Catholicism. They can see things that they quite like in this, and which way is things going to go? Are we going to find a medium way through things, or is it going to be a permanent division in the church, which is what it becomes? Yes,
because it was supposed to be a reformation, wasn't it? It wasn't supposed to be a complete destruction.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's followed then by a Catholic Reformation as well.
Well,
isn't it?
Indeed, the Counter-Reformation.
And the church is always going through waves of reform, and there are always new theological theories coming into things. And this one, one of the reasons it's so serious, I think, is because the Pope at the time, Luther, it kicks off by Luther. He just doesn't take it very seriously to start off with. Oh, it's another German, with his Christ-centric piety. Oh gosh, them and their devotions. Yeah. To an extent, there's that. So
he didn't see it coming.
Yeah, but there is a mix going on, and we shouldn't deny there are pockets of Protestantism, of enthusiasm for religious reform. They're mainly found in southern England, the Thames Valley, some of the ports, some of the London parishes as well. But up here in northern England, you get occasional early Protestants or evangelicals, or early before that were called the Lollards, earlier reformers. But they are islands of dissent in an overwhelming sea of conformity and satisfaction with traditional religion. I look at it like I always think of it as like a jumper you've had for years, and it's got a hole in it. You might repair it, but it does the job, and you've got a very strong bonds of affection. You've been through an awful lot with it, and you don't really want to cast it off.
Because, of course, these monasteries served the communities, didn't they? They weren't just for the monastic life.
Well, it's another thing. It's in this room as well, the chapter house, where documents are sealed, contracts between the monastery and the great landowners around here. Actually, landowners from princes to peasants, to be perfectly honest. And over there, you can see just beyond the houses, the modern village of Rievaulx, which is built on the site of the outer court of the monastery. Where we are is just a fraction of Rievaulx. It's a claustral nucleus, the main monastic buildings, but there was a whole other complex of buildings going on over there, agricultural buildings, and also the gatehouse where charity was dispensed. There was an enormous a guest house here where posh people were given hospitality. We know from a lot of other monasteries that they had schools. Furness Abbey, for instance, another Cistercian monastery in northern England over in Cumbria, it had a song and grammar school where the tenants' boys were educated for free. You know, they're deeply embedded in local society and they're a major provider of services.
Yes.
You know, you could say, you know, the welfare state
of a local community. Yeah.
You know, and also they're big employers. They've got all their tenants, and a monastery the size of Rievaulx, I think there's a ratio of 2 to 3 servants for every monk. So there would, even here in Rievaulx, potentially 100 servants looking after these monks. There's a hell of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then you also have people who've retired here. It's kind of retirement home as well. People called corrodians. You buy what's called a corrody, which is board and lodging, and you know you live out your days in a bit
How
of
nice!
comfort.
I really didn't understand that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's great. But we've lost the gatehouse, sadly, haven't we?
Yeah,
That's
the gatehouse
all
is gone. It's just archaeological evidence of it now.
Oh, okay.
You know, and you know there has been increasing focus on the outer court of the monastery and the, you know, what's supporting life within the monastery. We should never ignore that, that, you know, how these monasteries existed is because of what's going on in the outer court.
Now, is there anything else we need to think about while we're here in the chapter house?
Well, it's in the chapter house as well that Rievaulx Abbey ceases to exist, legally ceases to exist here on the 3rd of December 1538. Now we've had 1533 and we're getting a taste of what's to come, and the pace of reform increases, and in 1536 an Act of Parliament is passed for the suppression of the smaller monasteries, what are called the lesser monasteries, and that's monasteries with fewer than 12 inmates. I don't mean that like prisoners, and an income of below £200 a year. And it's said in the Act, it's quite pejorative language, where manifest sin is practised daily. So they're not up to it. You see, what's happened in 1535 is Henry and Cromwell as Henry's vice-regent in ecclesiastical affairs has ordered 2 rounds of visitations of monasteries. One of them in 1535 is called the Valor Ecclesiasticus. It's to value all church property. And the other one is a set of visitations to see what they're up to. Are the monks and nuns behaving themselves? And it doesn't reveal anything that hasn't been seen in earlier visitations, but the climate is such that it provides an excuse to act against the monasteries, resulting in the 1536 Act. Now, it's uncontroversial in some bits of the country, but not here in the northern counties, and it is a major catalyst for a rebellion called the Pilgrimage of Grace. 1536, most of northern England rises, largely motivated by the religious policies of Henry VIII, including the attack on the monasteries. Henry is in a very, very weak position indeed. An enormous army has been raised, and some of the great northern aristocrats are involved in it some way or another. So too have the abbots and priors of various northern monasteries. And the Duke of Norfolk assembles a very, very weak force near Doncaster. And the loyalty of a lot of his troops is open to question as well. And realising the weakness of his position, he agrees to a parley. And basically the pilgrims, rebelling against the king is a terrible thing to do.
Acts of treason.
Absolutely, and people felt that at the time as well. You know, it's like whilst rebelling in defence of the monasteries, they were saying, well, it's your evil counsellors were rebelling against your Majesty, Cromwell included. And anyway, there's a kind of truce in which Henry breaks, and it's an excuse to act against the ringleaders from 1536. So in early 1537, the main leader of the pilgrimages are all the main leaders of the pilgrimage are executed quite brutally, and that includes the heads of several religious houses as well, including one of the greater monasteries, that's Furness Abbey, which had been exempt from the earlier round of suppressions in 1530.
So was this the excuse then to roll in the rest of the monasteries?
Yeah, these monasteries have been, you know, places like Rievaulx Abbey, whose abbot is only very, very minorly implicated in the pilgrimage. The Crown seizes that because what's called a tainder, because they're guilty of treason. And then the abbot of Furness, whose monks have been very vocal in support of the pilgrimage, is terrified that his monastery is going to suffer a similar fate, and he's going to end up hung, drawn and quartered. And he voluntarily, along with his monks, surrenders the monastery to the Crown, sparing their lives, and they can go off with what are called capacities to become priests.
So that was the forerunner, that was the model,
that
the
creates
catalyst.
a legal precedent for the suppression of the greater monasteries, that you can voluntarily surrender themselves. Now, it isn't clear immediately that that's going to happen in the summer of 1538, but by 1538 it's clear that the greater monasteries are starting to come down. And the commissioners of Thomas Cromwell do these tours of the country, and, you know, it's one that, you know, one day it's such and such a monastery, the next day it's that, and you can track their progress by dates of surrender. And it's the turn of so many of these great northern monasteries in late 1538. Rievaulx's turn comes on the 3rd of December, when Abbot Rowland Blyton and his 29 monks put their signatures to the deed of surrender. Rievaulx Abbey ceases to exist. It is now the property of the Crown. They are given pensions. Rowland Blyton gets a very generous pension of 100 marks a year. That's a mark's two-thirds of a pound, and one of the abbey's former granges, or manor houses, in which to retire. So he's
very
done
nice.
very well
So
indeed.
he's well looked after. Yes,
indeed. And I wonder if that's a bit of a reward for doing Henry's and Thomas's work earlier on. Whereas the monks get much more modest pensions. They're about £5 to £6 a year. Now that sounds derisory to us, but you can live on it. You know, it's the income of a priest around that time.
So you're not going to be a pauper. You're not going to be in poverty.
No,
you're going to be a reasonably comfortable life, if not luxurious.
And a lot of them also secure what are called a living as a priest as well. They become parish priests or assistant priests. So, you know, they're not necessarily that badly off, but that doesn't mean they stop being attached to the monastic life, and we'll talk about that
later.
But what happened? One of the reasons why Rievaulx is so special is we have a document describing the condition of the church and what's happening to it, and the other buildings around the cloisters when the abbey is being dissolved.
So. Yes.
And we've got some tangible evidence.
We need to
look at this. You know, it's ruined first of all, isn't it? And it's always worth stating the obvious. You know, a lot of visitors from overseas come to English heritage sites, come to these, and one of the questions is, why are they wrecked?
Yeah, why are they in ruins? These beautiful buildings.
Yeah. Why, you know, and it's worth stating that the dissolution of the monasteries results in just enormous destruction, enormous cultural destruction. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will have looked at horror with what was happening in the Middle East with, you know, with IS.
With IS, yeah.
You know, actually, what happened here was every single bit as horrible. And it wasn't just the case of sweeping away, these institutions are all decadent. The people who were doing it knew that they were destroying places of enormous historical significance. St. Augustine's Abbey in Canterbury, founded by St. Augustine when he arrived in England to convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons to Christianity at the end of the 6th century. destroyed. Lindisfarne, the great monastery of St Cuthbert, destroyed. There are people who were involved in it talk with regret about their role in it. And also there's it's interesting, there's a former Carmelite friar called John Bale who becomes a white-hot Protestant. He writes plays attacking the monasteries, is a great propagandist against the monasteries, but even he can see what's going on, and he describes the Dissolution era as a wicked age, much given to the destruction of things memorable. And also, it's not as sort of peaceful and as polite. The Disillusion, it's a very nice polite term.
Yes.
People do lose their lives, and it happens at key stages of the suppression process. At the very beginning, some what are called the Observant Franciscans, a very austere order. Some of them are killed, and some Carthusians are killed as well.
In horrible ways, as you said.
Absolutely horrible ways. And then again, when the main round, some monks, the Pilgrimage of Grace, a monk of Fountains Abbey in 1538 is hung, drawn and quartered for speaking out in defence of the monasteries and saying that people are ready to rebel in them. Rievaulx Abbey, not that far
just
away
down
from
the road,
here, another
yes.
Cistercian house, a monk called what was it? It's Lazenby. What was the name? Was it George Lazenby?
George Lazenby.
A monk fantastically called George Lazenby. He could have done with James Bond's skills. Speaks out in defence of papal supremacy and is executed. And his head is rescued by a member of the Rievaulx community and preserved as a relic.
Wow.
That's the raw deaths. And then the most horrific one of all is probably the aged Abbot of Glastonbury, who is dragged to the top of Glastonbury Tor and hung, drawn and quartered, his dismembered remains nailed to the doors of his monastery. Why is the dissolution of the monasteries largely peaceful? Well, actually, it's not that peaceful, because we have a major rebellion which probably could have toppled Henry in the right circumstances. And then at key stages, people are brutally executed. And if I were a monk, I'd have thought, that pension sounds like a very good idea. And also, if we look here in the chapter house, it's just behind you here.
Yes.
This gives us an idea of the scale and violence of the destruction. Can you see this enormous great pier here, the column? And just look at it. Can you see anything that's standing out?
Well, I don't know whether you're talking about this here, this scar that's right through. It's like somebody's almost like hacked at it. Like if it was a tree trunk, somebody had taken an axe and kind of hacked a chunk of it away.
That is a perfect description of what's going on. Yeah, it just shows, get it down.
Yeah.
And there are instances of workmen being killed, in the haste to bring down abbeys and things like that. I mean,
spot of karma.
It had been thought that a couple of workmen were killed here at Rievaulx, because when this site was excavated, they found some skeletons under debris. Whether or not that's the case, or whether it's just skeletons that have been thrown out of graves whilst they're hunting for treasure, chalices that are buried with priests, for instance.
Yes.
We just don't know, but it gives you an idea of the destructiveness of it. But I think we need to go into the church now.
Yes.
The heart of the monastery.
Let's
because
do that.
We can talk whilst we're in there about what they're doing, what they're seizing.
So before we head into the church and continue our exploration of Rievaulx Abbey and the Dissolution, let's just take a short break and head over, as ever, to the TTG News Desk to find out exactly what Tudor news has been breaking in the month of January.
Welcome to the January O'Clock News with your newsreader, Robert Cole. Here are the Tudor headlines for the month. Anne of Cleves is received by Henry VIII at Greenwich Palace. Louis XII, husband of Mary Tudor, dies at l'Hôtel des Tournelles in Paris. Catherine of Aragon dies at Kimbolton Castle. Henry, the infant son of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, is baptised in the chapel of the Observant Friars in Richmond. Good day, and now for our top story. On this day, the 3rd of January 1540, Anne von Jülich-Cleveberg, who the English are already calling Anne of Cleves, was formally received with lavish pomp and ceremony by her future husband, His Grace King Henry VIII, on Blackheath, just outside the gates of Greenwich Park. The 25-year-old daughter of the late Duke Johann III of Cleves is due to marry the king in the next few days, making her His Grace's 4th wife. In doing so, she will assist in the English forging an alliance with the ducal states against England's enduring adversaries, the French and Spanish. We can now go over to our roving reporter, Bess Cavendish, who is on the wharf outside Greenwich Palace and next to the river, where great scenes of celebration are taking place. Bess, where exactly are you and what is currently going on?
A very good day to you, Robert. Well, I'm right here in front of the King's Lodgings on the north side of Greenwich Palace, on the wharf adjacent to the River Thames. And as you can probably hear, there's a great amount of rejoicing for the arrival of the new German princess, soon of course to become England's next queen. Despite the freezing cold, the river is awash with colour and music and singing coming from a vast flotilla of boats that have congregated here in front of the palace to wish the king and his new bride-to-be well.
It's not been an easy journey for the princess, has it?
All of us are well aware the weather, particularly in the last few weeks, has been atrocious here in England and in the Channel. But much to her credit, the princess has stoically pressed on regardless, aware of the eagerness of the king to meet with her. Anne of Cleves, as she's now being referred to here, left her homeland around 6 weeks ago, accompanied by many attendants and ladies of her brother's court. After being formally received by the English at Antwerp, I am told that she travelled through the Holy Roman Emperor's domains to Bruges and then onwards towards Calais, where the German princess was sumptuously lodged in the Exchequer, a palace, as you will probably know, Robert, that's well used by the court when staying in Calais.
Indeed. When did she arrive in England?
Well, she landed at Neadil just 3 days ago. Of course, the princess has had to wait at Calais for a whole 15 days before the weather turned in her favour and setting sail for England. But once she was ashore, she was greeted by the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk, along with a goodly entourage who accompanied the princess along the London to Dover road towards her reception here at Blackheath, just outside Greenwich Park.
Ah, did you witness that reception on Blackheath?
Aye, I did, Master Robert, and it was a fair and goodly sight, if truth be told. The king was dressed in rich cloth of gold and purple velvet, and adorned with diamonds and rubies, riding atop a goodly courser through the crowds with his entire court behind him. At the same time, his bride-to-be rode toward him on a richly trapped steed, and when they met, King Henry put off his bonnet and came forward to her, and with most loving countenance and princely behaviour, saluted, welcomed and embraced her to the great rejoicing of all present.
And tell me, what does this new princess look like? And was or did the king seem enamoured with his new bride?
Well, she's tall and thin, perhaps looking a little older than her 25 years. And she may not be described as beautiful, but everyone affirmed that by my troth there is no doubt that this princess is very assured in carriage and countenance, showing that in her the turn and vivacity of wit supplies the place of beauty. However, many were remarking on the strange dress that both the princess and her ladies were wearing. It was so heavy and unbecoming that I heard somebody close by to me say that even if the ladies were beautiful, then their attire would make them appear ugly. As for what the king makes of her, well, if his grace was displeased in any way, there was naught to be seen of it today. But I guess time, Master Robert, will tell.
Indeed it will, Bess. Let us pray that his marriage will bring his grace much comfort and conjugal delight in the years to come. Well, thank you for all of that, Bess, and after 3 years without a wife, it is of great comfort to all his grace's subjects that he should again take a wife. Now, all that remains for me to say is to wish you all good day, and we will be back in February with the latest Tudor news.
Well, speaking of other events where storm clouds were certainly gathering, we can go back to Rievaulx Abbey and go back into the story of the Abbey and the dissolution of the monasteries.
So we've just come out of the chapter house now and we're walking around what would have been part of the great cloister.
Wow, great is the word. Look at the size of it.
It's
huge.
It is
enormous, isn't it? And that gives you a sense of the scale of Rievaulx Abbey. And can you see what I'm standing on?
So, yes, some sort of slabs of stone here.
Yeah, what do you think it might be?
Oh, goodness me.
There's some more there as well. And there's another one there.
Oh, are these gravestones?
They are indeed.
Because that's what you can see if you go to Gloucester Cathedral, which is a still intact cathedral. Many people will know it from the old Harry Potter movies. Yeah. But you see lots of, don't you, the stones inlaid on the... And that's that here,
is it?
And
actually, Gloucester Cathedral used to be an abbey.
Yes, of course it did.
And these are the tombs of probably local bigwigs
who
are wanting to be buried here at Rievaulx Abbey because they think it's going to put them on an express elevator up to heaven. Their sin-stained souls are going to be spared the pains of purgatory and go to heaven. And it's and this is the East Range. It's the entrance of the chapter house. It's a very good place to be buried. So as we walk up, Cistercian monasteries have recognisable plans. I could see one and instantly recognise it when it's replicated, often with a few little details changed around Europe. But we're going to stop here in front of this arch recess.
So it's a bricked up arch, isn't it?
Well, no, it's not actually. This is exactly how it was built.
Oh, right,
it's stone, and it's here in the cloister. It's just by an entrance to the church.
Yes. And
next to it, we've got the remains of a room, and you can see the curving of the surviving stone showing it was vaulted.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure many of your listeners will have read and seen The Name of the Rose, that great Umberto Eco novel set in the Italian 14th century monastery, where they have this enormous library, don't they, and a scriptorium. It's who knows how many. It's like the British Library, and they must have had hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of books in that. Well, the reality for monasteries in the Middle Ages was actually somewhat different.
Okay.
A catalogue of the library made here at Rievaulx at the end of the 12th century lists about 200 books, and that's about right for a monastery of this size. And remember, they're all handwritten.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
By the end of the Middle Ages, there would have been more, because more books have been copied, they've been bought as well. Monks are buying books as well. I have this brilliant inscription I found in a book from Lelland Abbey nearby, another Cistercian house, and it mentions how the monk had bought it from a local carpenter.
Oh, wonderful.
Who'd have
How
thought
wonderful.
A carpenter doubling as a book trader. But also print. We're into the age of print as well. So there would have been at least 1,000 books here at Rievaulx, possibly even more, and the monks themselves would have had small little individual libraries, and it would have been housed. The main library is housed in that cupboard here and in the room next to it.
I see.
And you take the books out, you don't read them there's not enough space, and you read them in the north alley of the cloister, which gets the sunshine, and there's actually a mention in documents of the Dissolution era of the carols, the reading desks for the monks there. Now we now read silently, don't we? Well, silent reading's an innovation of the 17th century.
Is that so?
And monks had what was called ruminative reading. You read outside, you read out loud, meditating.
It was a meditative practice, almost. Right,
indeed.
okay.
But anyway, another thing that's very important about the Disillusion and books is just before it all happens, Henry VIII's librarian and antiquary, a bloke called John Lelland, tours the monasteries, making notes of books that, well, you know what, they can go to Henry, you know.
The best, the cream of the crop.
Absolutely, and a lot of those are now in the British Library today.
Right.
Other books we know are being bought by local gents. Some of them end up in parish churches, and the monks themselves slip some things in their saddlebags when they're leaving, either by subterfuge or I'll turn a blind eye to that. Just go quietly.
Yeah.
And that's an important way of how books survive. The monks themselves, and then a lot of those, because you know, a lot of them become associated with very religiously conservative families, and you know, some very important medieval manuscripts have survived until recent times on the bookshelves of Catholic families.
Right. Because of that.
Yes, indeed.
Wow. Well, I think, you know, towards the end of our chat today, I'd love to talk to you about what survives and where people can see those. Yeah. But in the meantime, we're heading up this semicircular stone staircase that's taking us into the nave of the church, right?
Yep, it is indeed. And if we turn to our right, you can see something here.
Oh, here. This looks like some kind of... is this where the holy water, where you would cross yourself?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And, you know, there's still enough of
I'm just going to do that.
You know,
we're just doing that.
As a Catholic, I'll still do it. And you know, it's a religious space, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, we have a description of the church and the other buildings here at Rievaulx just after it's been suppressed, and it gives an idea of the building as a functioning monastery. And although the monks have been dispersed, the position of altars and images and other fittings and fixtures in the church gives us an idea of what Cistercian monasticism was like at the end of the Middle Ages. Now, to our right here, we can see a doorway. It's got these chains over it. You know, the English heritage sites are full of walls of death.
Yes.
You know, go
Public
there at
safety
your peril.
Nightmares, yes.
But actually, it would have been a stairway going up. And that would have been the stairway that led to the monks' dormitory. It's called the night stairs. Now, monks have to get up at 2 a.m. to sing the first of their
I'm an
day,
early morning lady, but that's...
first of their services. And they would have come down these stairs, and they would have made a deep bow at the two altars.
So there's two altars in front of us here.
Indeed.
I have to say that just the view is incredible. I mean, I know it would be lovely to see it complete, but with the ruined window, you can see through into the countryside beyond, and it's just a phenomenal sight.
You can see the bases of the altars, actually, and you can see them, and actually the altars themselves survive in the naves. A number of chapels were inserted in the nave, and you can still see the little consecration crosses on them.
Are they original tiles?
They are. I mean, the Cistercians are very famous for their floor tiles, and Rievaulx Abbey has a remarkable collection of floor tiles from the 12th to the early 16th century. I mean, there's a big selection of them in the Abbey Museum here. Some of them were so important they were lifted and carted off down to the British Museum. You know, it's really worth looking at detail, even a ruined building. And what can you see here? In front of us, we've got a big pier, enormous pier, supporting this glorious 13th century architecture. I mean, this is one of the most important buildings, even as a ruin, one of the most important religious buildings in northern England. They've got this soaring architecture, but I'm going to be an uber nerd and get you to look at some very minor details, which most people will probably walk past.
You would walk past for sure. So within this carved pillar, all I can see is in the very front there are almost like holes where something should have been affixed to the pillar. And then my gaze moves down towards almost to my eye level, and it's cut in. There's something. There's a kind of a square cut in to this pillar, and a couple of holes on either side. I don't know whether they're related, but that's what I see.
I can tell you exactly what was there.
Okay.
Because the inventory that's made of the possessions of the abbey at the time of its dissolution, or just after, mentions that there is an image of St. Christopher here beneath the canopy. Now, St Christopher is even in modern secular Britain, I think one of the more famous of saints.
Yes, indeed.
Carrying Christ is known as the patron saint of travellers. Well, there's a reason why he's especially associated, why travellers might want his protection and his intercession. It's because seeing an image of St Christopher was thought to provide a protection against dying without receiving the last sacrament that day. So if you die without receiving the last sacrament, there's a very high chance you might go to hell because you'll have unforgiven sin on your soul. So it's very important. So, seeing the image of Christopher, and it's strategically located.
So they'd come past it, wouldn't they, when they came down the staircase?
There we go, and here you are.
You see it on your right-hand side as you pass by.
And then there's another very, very important thing. So they got up at 2 a.m, haven't they?
Yes.
Seeing an image of St Christopher is also a protection against tiredness. And monks who fell asleep in their choir stalls, which we'll be getting to, we'll take the route they would have taken.
Yes.
If you fall asleep in the choir stalls, oh boy.
Problems. Big problems.
You're punished in the chapter house, and also it could be even worse. In the 13th century, a German Cistercian called Caesarius of Heisterbach. I can't remember if I got the pronunciation right. A German Cistercian records these moralising tales, and he describes how this monk falls asleep during the night office, and Christ himself comes down off the monastery's cross, strikes the monk across the face to wake him up, and then the poor monk is so traumatised by the experience that he dies in the Abbey's infirmary 2 days.
Word.
I'm sure in a state of grace, but don't fall asleep during the night office. And actually, I've tried this St Christopher image when I give lectures.
Yes.
We often put it up.
Yes. Has it worked?
Well, I gaze around, and I attribute people nodding off in my lectures to the fact that an awful lot of them take place in darkened rooms, a little bit stuffy, 5 o'clock, winter evenings, your eyes start to go, So, I need to do a control group one day, don't I?
Really,
a randomised controlled trial.
Absolutely.
Efficacy of St.
Well,
Christopher
hopefully
image.
you won't kill anybody in an infirmary 2 days later.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going up we're in this glorious extension to the church built in the 13th century, and it's often said to be a symbol of the Cistercians' decadence and decline. There's any number of documentaries have been made here at Rievaulx saying this. The Cistercians have given up all their austerity and they've now gone for this fancy architecture. They're just like anybody else. Well, there's a reason they build this here at Rievaulx, and it's to house the relics of St Aelred, which are placed above, and we've got a description of this in the Suppression era inventory. You can see the Abbey's high altar there, can't you?
Yes,
which was restored to its original position about 5 years ago. On a beam above that, there was a little shrine gilded, according to the inventory, and they were the relics of St Aelred, contained in this relical chasse, like a little house, architectural chasse, and it's the centre of the monastery, and that is the reason why this is built here. Aelred is the most important churchman of the 12th century. He's an incredibly important Cistercian saint. His feast day on the 12th of January remains in the calendars of the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches to this day. He's what's called a spontaneous cult builds up around him here at Rievaulx, and then it's given official sanction by the Cistercian order in 1476, and they cite old and new miracles attributed to him.
So did you get a lot of pilgrims coming here or not?
No, this isn't a pilgrimage church. And actually the Cistercians can be a bit sniffy about pilgrims, unless they've got a really fantastic relic like Rievaulx Abbey down in Gloucestershire, which has a relic of the Holy Blood and becomes one of the most important pilgrimage destinations. No, we've got modest evidence of pilgrimage here. People are making offerings to Aelred's shrine, called oblations, and we've found in the excavations where William's shrine was a little votive shoe, a little lead shoe, and so perhaps a monk or a lay person had a foot complaint that they hoped William's prayers would help heal. No, it's not a pilgrimage church, but that doesn't mean that he's not a locally important saint, and actually a very important saint more generally to the Cistercian order. Right, now we've been talking about this glorious building here, but actually I'm going to take you into what another building people probably pass by without realising its significance. And we've got 3 steps which are taking us down, and then low foundations of a sort of rectangular room. Shall we go down in there?
Absolutely. No, because I nearly fell down it, and I was just thinking, what is down here? Because it is very obviously its own enclosed room.
Yeah, and it's an extension. It's a 14th century extension. And if we look where it is, you can see through the piers there the high altar. And that's where Mass is celebrated, the high Mass. Where the bread and wine are miraculously turned into the body and blood of Christ, and there's these stairs leading up to it. It's a very well located room. It's the sacristy, where the monastery's sacred vessels, the altar plate, processional crosses, chalices, patens, thuribles for the incense, monstrances for carrying relics, and the host on Corpus Christi Day, and vestments are stored. Now, not a single. This gives you an idea of the destruction of the English of the dissolution of the monasteries, and it's in the Reformation generally. Not enough chalices survive from medieval England to serve the needs of a large parish church, let alone a monastery. Not a single surviving chalice has a known monastic provenance. That they're inventoried and then they're carted off down to Henry VIII's jewel tower, jewel house rather, at the Tower to be melted down. We don't have a description of the contents of the sacristy here at Rievaulx. There definitely would have been one, but we have one for Fountains Abbey, and also and Rievaulx Abbey and comparable monasteries. And Fountains Abbey had £509 worth of precious metal plate. Wow. It's an enormous amount of money. They have 80 copes. They're a vestment that's worn, a cloak-like vestment that's worn for processions, and they have suits of vestments. It's called a chasuble, a dalmatic, and a tunicle, which are worn by the officiating clergy at Mass. And they've got numerous of those as well, richly embroidered, and a remarkable set survives from an English Cistercian monastery, from Rievaulx Abbey. You can see them at Townley Hall and at Burnley, and also at the Burrell Collection. And they give a real sense of the richness, the liturgical richness and array of materials, and just the general gorgeousness. Yes. And most of it destroyed. There's a handful
it's
of vestments.
incredible. How many monasteries were there?
There's possibly like 800 monasteries. Now, not all of them are as rich and fancy as Rievaulx, but even the most humble monastery would have to have a few silver chalices, silver gilt chalices for the liturgy, vestments for the priests, and just carted away and sold. And we'll go into the church now and we'll talk about some other things which were. I'll let you go first.
Thank you.
Now, let's do it the right way.
Okay.
Okay. Now, we're passing a little divot in the ground here,
yes.
and this is where there was what was called the lava, where the monks would, not as in lava lamp, it was where the monks would ceremonially wash.
Ah, I see.
Before going. You can see the footings of their choir stalls there.
Right, I can indeed. Right in the centre
here we are, and you can see them gazing up there, looking at
the windows, which are just majestic. I mean, it's lovely. There's a lot survives at Rievaulx. I mean, it is in ruins, but actually they're good ruins, aren't they? They're substantial ruins, so you really
do get
the grandeur is incredible.
And also, if you go somewhere like York Minster, which it's had its trials and tribulations, York Minster, it must be said. I can remember when it got struck by lightning in 1984.
Oh, yes.
But gives you an idea of what this might have looked like towards the end of the Middle Ages.
Incredible.
Just how grand. But you can see this. These are the stalls where the monks gathered 8 times a day to sing the services that are at the core of their monastic day. And let's go up these steps here.
So 2 little steps here. We're going closer to the high altar.
Yeah, and we've got a nice old-fashioned Ministry of Works plaque, presbytery. If you don't know what a presbytery
No,
is...
I don't know what a presbytery is.
It comes from priests.
Okay.
It's the holiest part of the church. It's basically where the liturgy is celebrated, the Mass is celebrated. It's really interesting, these Ministry of Works signs. You find them all over, like it'll say daughter, D-O-R-T-E-R,
yes.
or rarer daughter,
Yes.
you know. And, you know, they were put in the 1920s to the 1950s. And it's almost that kind of thing, if you don't know what it means, you should jolly well go away and find out,
yes,
you know.
Daughter
Daughter is basically the dormitory, rarer daughter is the loos.
Right.
Oh, and the one they use is frata. That's the dining room,
Yes.
the refectory. But anyway, sorry, come on, let's
You
keep
do
on.
need your Latin dictionary, don't
Keep
you?
on coming up, right?
Yes.
We've got some more steps. And on either side of us, we can see some more of these small details that people will walk past, can't we? We've got another one of these enormous great cuttings.
Oh, yes, we do, yes.
And then this
On
other
one of the
one here.
pillars. Yeah, and over
There's
to
a-
our right.
There's a big base of something here.
Yes.
And I can tell you what was here as well.
Tell
we
me.
have got tombs of very, very important, at the base of tombs of very important bigwigs who've requested burial here at the monastery, and they have been buried in the very, very best place of all, close to the high altar.
Right next to the high altar.
Where the Mass is celebrated, where the miracle of transubstantiation takes place, where they will be in the prayers of the officiating priest. And this tomb here, we're on the south side of the high altar. We know who was buried here.
That was the next thing on my list. Who's in here?
It is two members of the noble de Ros family, buried here at the end of the 14th century, and they are the descendants of the founder, and by right they have the right of burial here at Rievaulx. And another member of the family is buried in front of the high altar, and then there's somebody else has been buried there. I'm not sure who that one was. And here it is. We've got the altar slab, this great, enormous altar slab. It's all battered around.
Yes.
Another indication of the destruction that takes place, restored to its original position 2015 by English Heritage, and above it, as I said, was the beam with the relics of St Aelred, the little shrine gilded here in the church, and standing on the altar was an image of the Blessed Virgin Mary, to whom, a gilt image of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and it's to whom the abbey is dedicated. The high altar is the Virgin altar as well, you know. So that's, you know, and that's gone. That's just destroyed. It's something that's just there to be sold off.
Did this just survive somewhere near here?
It's
Was it
been
just cast
moved-
to the ground?
Yeah, it just cast around, and it's all been hacked around, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And it's been moved around various positions, and then it was, you know, the decision was made. It's reconsecrated as well, actually.
Oh, really?
So the liturgy can be celebrated on here.
Wow.
There's an ecumenical service for its rededication, 2015. And then you can see there are these 5 altars against the east end of the church, and there's a walkway around it,
Yes.
and this bench here just behind the altar, and that's associated with Aelred Shrine. It's a watching bench where people, whether monks or local bigwigs, would have been allowed in the church here, and perhaps selected pilgrims as well to Aelred Shrine to venerate him. But we know that on each of these altars there were images standing which have been taken away and destroyed. It is, you know, reading the inventory that's made here in 1538 is fascinating, but it is also incredibly mournful as well.
That just so much has gone.
Yeah, and also we get a sense of just the destruction as well. And I think to get an idea of what they're up to, just how much destruction there is here at Rievaulx, you get a sense of it obviously with the ruins. But another sense of it is, if we go into the Abbey Museum here, we will see some shattered remains which really tell the story.
So, Michael, you've brought me inside the museum here at Rievaulx. What are we here to see? I mean, there's many, many stone artefacts around. What would you like to show us in here?
I mean, it's a remarkable museum. It was kitted out 2016, and my colleague Susan did a brilliant job with the collection here and how to display it. But we're going to look at what is actually one of the treasures of medieval English sculpture. And it depicts a seated figure, and what's the most obvious thing about it?
Well, it's got no head, it's got no arms, basically.
Yeah, it was an image of Christ in majesty, an image of Christ as in judgment, and it could well have been above a portal. There's a surviving intact example at Lincoln Cathedral. It dates to around about 1260 to 1280, and it's this very, very intricate knot there.
Beautifully carved knot around the waist, holding all the garments together. It's just gorgeous, isn't it?
And look at it. It is just this image, Christ the Saviour, and it's just a thing at the Disillusion. It's just.
I find that really hard to understand for such religious people of the time, that they would even go so far as to destroy a figure of Christ.
It's interesting. At the time of the Dissolution, it's still essentially a Catholic country, and that is and the veneration of images is still allowed. Although people like Cromwell are getting very, very suspicious about trying to roll that back. So it's not. You don't get that much purposeful iconoclasm at that stage. It's possible this is damaged during the destruction of the monastery, or you get another wave of people coming and smashing what survived. And we got all these fragments of stonework, and it's just like, Susan described it brilliantly as shattered remains.
Yes.
And that is what we're looking at. Look at that, another decapitated figure of a saint. A figure of a saint or a prophet that's been hacked off an image, a shattered altar retable there. Look at this as well. Just turn the corner, and what have we got? Look at this. This is a tomb.
Oh, this is one of the tombs. Yes.
A tomb of a noble lady, 14th century. You can see her hand across her breast. She would have been tugging at the hem of her garment. It's something they did at that time, simultaneously both a marker of status and humility. It's a very odd thing indeed. Look at it. That tombs of ancestors, they don't really matter.
Nothing matters. Nothing is sacred.
Actually, although at some monasteries, the Duke of Norfolk is very, very upset when Thetford Priory is being dissolved.
That was his family mausoleum,
yes,
of course.
and he wants it to be turned into what's called a college of secular canons, but Cromwell's having none of it. Thetford is coming down, so he has to exhume the bones of his ancestors and bury them in a parish church. Not quite the same thing, is it?
Not quite the same cachet.
And there's a story that when Cromwell falls, it's the Duke of Norfolk who arrests him, and he marches up to Cromwell and grabs the great chain of office around his neck, pulls it off and says, "That's for Thetford."
Is that right? I knew about Norfolk and the pulling of the chain, but I didn't know about that quote. That's really interesting.
And here we are. I talked about Abbot William before, didn't I? St. William. And we've got this bit of his shrine here. Shrines targeted for destruction at this time. Relics, sometimes the monks make an attempt to save them and secretly rebury them. Often they're just cast away. Another enormous funerary slab which has just been shattered. And here we have something very, very fascinating. Again, it's possibly worth just saying what you can see.
What I can see? It reminds me of a peacock.
It reminds you of a peacock because it is a peacock. And that is the badge of the de Ros family. So their own, and Earl Manners, who gets the monastery, has inherited the coat of arms, and he's the direct descendant of the founder of the de Ros family. Look at that, his own heraldry being destroyed. Just this level of destruction. And we go piece after piece. We've got this wonderful array of ex situ stone heads from the church. And now we're walking through this enormous and what would have been an incredibly impressive screen that was built in the church, enclosing the monks' choir stalls at the west end and around about 1500. It's directly comparable to some of the great churches in northern England, at Ripon Minster, York Minster, this kind of screen.
I was going to say, it reminds me of York Minster, because it's great that you can go, as you say, go to somewhere like York Minster, go and see that and see what it would have looked like.
And it's probably been dismantled to be reused, and then what happens is that the knocking things down, and the church collapses on top of it, and they can't sell it. They are trying to, they want to sell things, they want to make money. There's a description of the glass. Come and have a look at this stained glass here. I think it's been beautifully displayed.
Look at that.
But shattered. Look at it, absolutely shattered.
We're looking at a cabinet and it's just full of shards or pieces of beautifully worked medieval glass. That's incredible.
You can see some hands, there's crowns, the literal eye, some beautiful blue there.
And what are these?
These are ventilators. These metal things here, they look like tracery, like medieval windows. They're ventilators. To let the air in, Wow. But the glass, it's like, the best sort is, the inventory says the best sort is to be kept. The second sort is to be sold, and the third sort, you just strip it for the lead. Lead is a very, very important commodity, and that brings us to what's the final object here in the museum, which is this enormous sort of, what shape would you describe
I don't know.
it
It almost reminds me of a teardrop. If it was.
Oh, that's so evocative.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? But how big is that? What? 2 foot? 2 foot?
Oh, more than that.
2, 3.
It's at least a metre.
Yeah, at least.
At least a metre, and it is enormously heavy. And it's this enormous bit of lead. It's what's called a fother. And the lead is melted down on site, and there's a description of the fall of Rievaulx Abbey, a Cistercian abbey in South Yorkshire, made by a chap called Michael Sherbrooke, whose father and uncle actually saw it all happen. And he says how the wood from the choir stalls was used to burn, to melt the leads, and to cast them into these fothers. And look what's been stamped on it.
Yes, there is a very unmistakable coat of arms of what looks to me like a Tudor rose with a crown above it.
That's because it is a Tudor rose with a crown above it.
I'm doing quite well today.
It's the stamp, it's the badge of Henry VIII with the King's mark.
This belongs to me.
Yeah, and that's it. 400 years of piety, prayer, of charity, of hospitality, of employment have been reduced to this. All that matters is money, and you know what? I'm Henry and I've won. It's mine.
It really hurts your heart to just think about the level of destruction and loss, and that this lead was once in the roofs, in the windows here, and now it's just this slab waiting to be sold off.
There would have been hundreds of them. I recently transcribed a document from Infirmary Abbey, and it describes how there were 200 and odd of these there at the church, and they've done it very quickly. You strip the leads to try and make the building unusable. It's a lot of money, and there's actually a glut of lead on the market. They can't get rid of it. They can't sell it as quickly as they want to do. The market's been flooded. And similarly, with the vestments that I was talking about, some of them are sent off to Henry to pick out the gold thread and things like that. Other ones are signed to parish churches, and actually there's so many of them, they're selling for a fraction of what the monasteries would have paid for them. You could get an altar cloth for 6p.
Wow, amazing.
A whole suit of vestments for £1. But it is. We got this window here gazing out on the ruin, and
bathed in sunshine. It looks glorious.
But gosh, Rievaulx Abbey is stunning, and it gladdens my heart every time. Actually, I'll say it gladdens my soul, and I use that term unapologetically, and you can interpret it how you will. But it really does. But gosh, it's also an incredibly melancholy scene.
It is, it does. It leaves you very reflective.
Yeah, but it's not, all this isn't the actual end of the story. And
so maybe we should go outside, because we're inside and we've been having to wear masks because of COVID. So if there is any muffling to our voices, my apologies for that. So we'll come outside and we can take off our masks again and continue as you say, to the end of the story, the epilogue of the story.
Yes, you know, Rievaulx's dissolved, as are all monasteries across England. The last monasteries fall in 1540. They've gone in the space of 4 years. Something which was unbelievable has happened. Indeed, so unbelievable. There is a story that the great chronicler of monasteries in the 17th century is a man called William Duggal, to which scholars to this day are indebted to him. He composes the Monasticon Anglicanum, and it's a collection of charters of all the monasteries that he could assemble at that time, and it's fearful of further loss because of the coming civil wars. But he tells of a story of a Rievaulx monk, and it's actually, the name of the monk unfortunately escapes me, but he is known to have been a monk here at the time of the suppression,
right,
who found in one of the abbey's manuscripts basically a prophecy foretelling the fall of the abbey rather, and he threw it aside, believing that could never ever come to pass, and it did. But a sense of just how traumatic it was for the monks is shown by what some of them are doing afterwards. And they display a remarkable degree of community solidarity. They keep in touch with one another. And one of the three of the monks I found evidence in their wills, they all start dropping dead. Actually, one of them drops dead within a couple of months of Rievaulx being dissolved, and that's not uncommon. You know, one modern scholar has detected symptoms of what we would now recognise as post-traumatic stress disorder in their reaction to what's happening. Anyway, and he drops dead, and he remembers in his will everybody who had been with him on that day, and the last will of that type is in 1555, and it says, "I leave to every one of my brothers who was with me at Rievaulx Abbey on the day of its dissolution."
Oh my goodness.
I think he leaves them 6 each, you know, and it's just heartrending.
It is heartbreaking.
And then, but there's an even better epilogue than that. You know, there's this community solidarity. In actual fact, some former monastic communities try and live a quasi-monastic life. Monk Breton Priory, it's a Benedictine house in the outskirts of Barnsley, and the final prior there and a few of his brethren retire to a local manor house and try and live as monks, buying back former possessions of the monastery to help them along their way. Some nuns from Kirklees Priory retire to what becomes known as Papist Hall, where they continue to live a monastic life. Some nuns from Denny Abbey down, they're Poor Clares, Franciscan nuns, they retire to the manor house of their aristocratic abbess, Abbess Throckmorton at Cowton Court, where they live a monastic life. You know, so there's this attempts to carry things on. And also they're hoping for better times as well, and those better times do indeed come, however briefly, because in 1553 the Catholic Queen Mary ascends to the throne, and in 1554 England is formally reconciled with the Catholic Church, and monasteries start to be refounded in and around London. Westminster Abbey, for instance. The Blackfriars take over St Bartholomew's, which had been an Augustinian house, but it becomes a Dominican convent. And it is very, very clear indeed that former monks and nuns are hoping they're going to be next. And we have tangible evidence of this from up here in northern England. Do you remember Rowland Blyton, who I mentioned? The final abbot of Rievaulx, who's basically been imposed on the community, compliant Rowland Blyton, 1533, and he came from Rufford Abbey. He doesn't ever seem to have got on very well with the Rievaulx community, and I wonder why. In 1554, the surviving monks of Rufford Abbey, with Rowland Blyton at their head, assume their former monastic titles. So do the surviving monks of Roche. They are expecting that their monasteries are going to be restored by Mary. And of course it doesn't come to pass, because Mary dies 1558 and she's succeeded by her Protestant half-sister, who dissolves the monastery she's refounded.
But let me ask you then, Michael, to finish off our chat here today. Yeah, I think I would love to know, because what your favourite, maybe top 5 favourite abbeys, because there are some beauties, aren't there, to go and see. So you're the man in the know. What would be your top 5?
Right, this is my personal selection.
Yeah.
First of all, I'll preface it with that, and it's going to have all, like, I'm a historian, and like any historian, I've got my personal biases.
Of course.
Okay, and just bear that in mind. Well, of course, I've got to have Rievaulx in it. You know, I would if you haven't been to Rievaulx Abbey, come. And I just think, you can't go on a holiday abroad at the moment, and just get here.
It's so beautiful and peaceful.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
And whilst you're up here in Yorkshire, I'm sorry this is going to be, you can probably detect a bit of a northern accent here. And it is these abbeys, childhood visits to these abbeys.
I'm not going to fight you on this,
that
Michael.
has determined my career. But Fountains Abbey, not that far away, another Cistercian house, and its ruins are incredible. And it is very, very easy to visualise the church at Fountains as being complete. Then I'm going to veer off slightly, and it's going to be another ruin. Well, a sort of ruin, and it's going to be the Blackfriars at Gloucester. And that was the house of Dominicans, and they were so called because of the black cloaks they wore. And it's. I was going to say a ruin, it's kind of not, because it was converted into a house and various other purposes after the suppression. And what survives there is what's called the Scriptorium in the south range of the cloister. In actual fact, I think it was the abbey. Sorry, in actual fact, I think it was the library. But it's an incredible space, and it gives you a different scale and a size of a monastery. Can't forget that there were nuns. And there were more convents, I think, in Yorkshire than there were houses of. Well, there were certainly more Cistercian convents in Yorkshire than there were houses of Cistercian monks. There's Lazenby Abbey in Wiltshire, which was a nunnery. It's a stunning place, this cloister, and it gives you don't think of nunneries as just being places where unmarriageable daughters were dumped. That did happen, but people with genuine vocations, women with genuine vocations were entering them. And there was a level of female education in medieval nunneries that's only seen again in England when you get to the 18th century.
Right.
So how many have we got to there?
You've got 4, you've got one more.
Well, I think you have to go and see a fairly intact one.
That would be lovely. Where do I go?
I would recommend, we've mentioned Gloucester before as well. Now, Gloucester was originally a Benedictine abbey. Gloucester Abbey becomes a cathedral at the Dissolution. It's turned into a cathedral, and that secures the survival of a lot of its buildings. And boy, are those buildings glorious. Do you want to see a monastic church in its, even stripped of so many of its medieval fixtures and fittings? Gloucester still evokes it. It's got these enormous stained glass windows. There's still some woodwork and screens surviving in place. And of course, it's got that magnificent cloister.
Which is absolutely the best. Well, the best I've come across anywhere. It's absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So there are your top tips. And I guess the other thing, because I'm also interested in artefacts.
Yeah.
We've been talking about artefacts. We've been talking about how much has been lost. But what would you recommend if people wanted to go and see some of the genuine monastic artefacts that have survived?
Well, the British Library's just reopened to visitors, and its galleries there are really quite magnificent and have some of the book treasures of the world in them. And the Lindisfarne Gospels is a monastic book, and You know, you can't do that. And also there, you have, going to the other end of the Middle Ages, is the Sherborne Missal. It's a late 14th, early 15th century mass book. Beautiful illuminations showing Benedictine monks in their black habits. So we've got two books there. Now, I'm not going to be completely London-centric, you know. Up in Lancashire, I've already mentioned this. We've got in Townley Hall two of the most magnificent vestments that come from Rievaulx Abbey, two of the best vestments, they're 15th century vestments to survive from medieval England. I'm going to have to go back down to London again. Will you forgive me?
I'll forgive you.
And we're going to go to the British Museum, and they have these 3 ornamental roundels, which are called the Warden Abbey Morses, and they date to the end of the 14th century. And I identified the patron as a bloke called Abbot Walter Clifton. Warden's a daughter house, a dependent. You know, it's been founded by monks from Rievaulx, and he's abbot there at the end of the 14th century. And they've got these silver gilt images. They're quite small, and they've got images of the Virgin and Child on them, and also heraldry and things like that. And they give a sense of the glory of monastic metalwork, of so much of which has been lost. And then I'm going to send you then to the V&A. Train tickets down to London are really cheap at the moment. Take advantage of them. And when I had my train journey up here last night, I've never known a train to be so empty. So, you know, take advantage of that.
If you can travel in the UK at the moment, like many places, even though it's the height of the summer right now when we're recording this, and I'm sure this will be the same through the autumn, the lack of people is absolutely marvellous.
Well, there's something in the V&A that has just been lent to them, and it comes from an English Benedictine monastery, and it's this relic tablet, and it's got the bones and little bits of cloth of various English saints in it, and heraldry on it as well. And it's 14th century, and it possibly comes from the great Benedictine monastery at Bury St Edmunds. And there we have, monasteries were important repositories of relics. I've talked about them in connection with Rievaulx, and that plaque gives you a sense of what these relics were like.
How wonderful.
And it's a tangible link, you know, religious link, and also, it satisfies the kind of yuck factor as well. None of them are too gruesome, it must be said. It's some blood-stained cloth.
Oh, lovely!
Like
wow.
But you know, and also there's some the only silver surviving medieval monastic metalwork is at the V&A as well. From Ramsey Abbey.
Well, fantastic. Well, I have to say thank you for bringing to life the incredible, if not deeply traumatic and sad tale of the Dissolution, and sharing all your passion and knowledge. Thank you so much, Michael.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope my ramblings will make sense. You know, my enthusiasm can get the better of me.
Oh no, it's been wonderful, and of course you've given us lots of places to think about going to visit and things to go and see right throughout the breadth of the country, from the south, from London up here into the north. So I encourage you all to make the most of that and hit the road and see these fabulous, fabulous monuments.
Well, that's a massive thank you to Michael Carter. I can't tell you how much fun we had making that recording. Clearly, Michael is just so passionate about the subject, and his enthusiasm was certainly infectious, so thank you, Michael. Now, if you want to see more pictures of the Abbey or follow up on any of the links or resources that were mentioned in this podcast, then do make sure you click on the link in the description below. That will take you through to the show notes on my blog, where I have amassed a whole series of pictures and other goodies for you to follow up on at your leisure. So that's all for today's show, my friends. I'll be back with you in a couple of weeks with the very first episode in our new Tudor History and Travel Show feature called Travel Essentials. Now, if you love travelling to the UK to visit your Tudor places, then this is the show for you, because it is going to be rammed with top travel tips for planning your time travelling adventure, including some of the recommendations for the best places to stay, and all the news and updates on Tudor events that you might want to include on your Tudor itinerary if you are travelling here to the UK. So I'll say more about that show when we next meet. But until then, wherever you are in the world, stay safe and stay well. And I look forward to being with you on our next time travelling adventure. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Tudor History and Travel Show. If you've loved the show, please take a moment to subscribe, like and rate this podcast so that we can spread the Tudor love. Until next time, my friends, all that remains for me to say is happy time travelling!